you had a refreshing break and you are ready for a very, very interesting afternoon. We live in times of great transition. The rise of algorithmic decision-making, we have already mentioned it in the morning. The IoT with billions of sensors that are monitoring our behavior. The datification of everything that is reducing all of us into machine readable data. And the world politics that we try to keep out of the room, but even if we talk about technology, we have to take into account that we live in times of great global trade wars, and the race over the dominance of technologies such as AI and cybersecurity, robotics, and in general, data-driven innovation. We've already learned this morning that all of these technologies are creating social choices and require us to make not only social but also political choices in many cases. When we face great challenges, we must consult great minds. We need to look for intellectual leaders, those who have already challenged these issues and thought about them 2 decades ago, and we couldn't think of a better choice to help us do this than our keynote today, Professor Helen Nissenbaum. Professor Nissenbaum is a professor at Cornell Tech in New York. Before joining Cornell, she was a professor of media, culture, communication, and computer science at NYU, and also the director of the Information Law Institute at NYU. She's the author of 8 books, but she's also a developer of software. Track Me Not, for those of you who haven't used it, this is at least one software. I know that there are others. Software that helps you use search engines without disclosing your search request by generating thousands of search requests that would disguise your initial interest. Professor Nissenbaum has always been an intellectual pioneer. She was one of the first to identify the politics of search engines in times that we only had one, that we didn't have one search engine but many. She was one of the founders of a whole theoretical discipline, values in design. A lot of us have used this naturally this morning as if it exists, but she was one of the founders of this methodology and school of thought. And of course, she is the author of a theory of privacy, contextual integrity, a theory which helps us understand what are privacy expectations and why do they matter for our concept of privacy, something on which I hope we will hear more tomorrow. Stay tuned for tomorrow. Those of you who haven't registered, you're still welcome to join us. Helen is also a dear friend, personal friend, and a friend of our faculty and of the Center for Law and Technology. She was one of our first guests, international guests, when we established the center 20 years ago in the conference, Commodification of Information. So this is a great occasion to have you back, even though you have visited us in between. Thank you for joining us today.
Thank you so much, Niva. Is this yours?
Yeah. It's not mine, it's me.
Oh, yes. Is that you? Okay. All right. Well, I was going to say that I do try to jump at every invitation to participate in your events in Haifa and the Center of Law and Technology and now the Cyber Center, because from the very first time that I presented here, it was clear that this is an incredibly forward-looking place, and this is where I would come to learn, not only to learn what's been done, but what's about to happen. And so it's an enormous privilege to be giving this keynote. I also want to say, I just want to lower your expectations tremendously. That was a very generous introduction, because I tend to work more like in the weeds and focus on stuff, and this talk is really just all over the show, and it's my attempt to trying to not be crude. Just say something about what I've been seeing going on in this field of AI and ethics, which I'm sure many of you who just reading the headlines of the newspapers are realizing that, you know, everybody wants to talk about AI and ethics. And being an analytic philosopher by training, of course, I really have to say something about terminology, not because I want to declare that this is the meaning of it, but rather to say this is how I'm understanding it, so that when you hear the rest of what I'm saying, you'll kind of know the scope of what I'm talking about. So we've all seen this technological churn, and recently it's been really fast. You know, we would no sooner were we talking about big data, then all of a sudden we were talking about data and ethics, and the next thing you had all these data scientists who said, no, we have to have an ethics of data science, and suddenly it was machine learning, and there were a lot of people talking about ethics and algorithmic this and that, and now we have AI. So what do we mean by AI? And I'm going to, again, just sort of declare without giving much justification. I happen to be finishing up my PhD or doing my PhD in the 80s when there was like the first blip of AI, where AI was rule-based reasoning, and we were going to, you know, computers were going to take over the planet and so forth. And there was a lot of discussion then. Did it mean that machines were thinking and processing like intelligent humans? Were they functioning in distinctively human ways? Or and they sort of settled on, well, if they're performing functions that in humans require intelligence, we're going to call that AI. And the how is also relevant, because at the time we were focusing, at that time folks were focusing, Niels Nielsen, John McCarthy, Feigenbaum were creating expert systems, and they were focusing on rule-based reasoning. But today, of course, well, I say of course, I hope you can contest it, but most of the time what AI means is this whole train of technologies, big data, machine or statistical learning, algorithms and models. And so often this is what we mean by AI, anything that's the product of this particular how of producing results, which I'll talk about in a moment. And so, as we've seen already in the discussion thus far, is that the ethics in AI does engulf everything now. So everything that used to be ethics of big data, data science, algorithms, and so on, is now under the umbrella of ethics and AI, which is fine. I mean, I'm saying that we used to talk about behavioral advertising as a problem of big data. Now we talk about it as an ethical problem of AI, and that's all very nice. It's just I want to clear the deck and say this is what I'm doing. Now, so now I'm moving on to the substantive discussion of AI and ethics and principles. And as many of you, again, who've been following the discussion, is that there's been a lot of anxiety, especially with human-like outputs, computer vision, you know, recognizing a cat as a cat, and natural language processing, things that come really close to human intelligence. There's a lot of anxiety, and so there has been a proliferation of these principles. And this is a joke, not to mention the ethical wisdom of great prophets of the day. And so you have people like Mark Zuckerberg or Elon Musk who are anything but. And of course, you know, they are making pronouncements about the future of AI and whether it's going to help humanity or harm us and so forth. And this is, I think, deeply disturbing. But the ultimate principle, the ultimate thesis of this talk, and I'm not sure if I'll get there, because again, this is like a new project, and I have lots of slides. I might get there fast, maybe not. But it's this, that principles are great. It's very good that all these entities are developing principles for ethical AI. But despite, or in maybe because of the principles, there's going to be points of friction. And these points of friction are not incidental points of friction. And the point that I'm going to be making with each of these disparate little cases, and there are kind of mini cases, is that the friction or the clashes among the different values and among the different parties are inherent to the socio-technical systems that are now what AI is and is becoming in practice. So here are some of the principles I'm talking about. We have the Silamon. I'm not sure what you can read. It doesn't really matter because I'm going to zip through a whole bunch of them. Can you read, for example, that it says transparency? I can hardly read it. Responsibility and so forth. Is that size of print kind of legible? It doesn't really, you know, I just want you to grasp the gist of it. This is Google. I thought it was interesting. These are, these are AI principles, and I've picked out these. These are things that we will not pursue because, you know, there's been many of the, as you, again, has been tracked in the media. Google employees have been, have done a fair bit of protesting of applications of Google's AI systems to the military and bias, gender bias, and so forth. So they have these four areas, but you will not be surprised that at the bottom it says, as our experience in this place deepens, this list may evolve. And this is going to be familiar, and we'll come back to it in a moment. So this is now the World Economic Forum. Their principles for good, intelligibility or interpretability, data protection, flourishing, and here are, you know, SAP has guiding principles for artificial intelligence. IBM has everyday ethics for AI, and if you look at the 5 areas of focus, accountability, value alignment, fairness, and so on. And we have this is the Partnership on AI, which is a massive group of corporate and non-profit groups that have joined this. Safety critical, fairness and transparency, AI, you know, and labor, and so on. And finally, I included Microsoft, which has, for me, one of the most legible set of principles. And what I like about their scheme is that, you know, they show some of the structure. So you could have fairness, reliability, privacy, inclusiveness, but that issue, principles of transparency and accountability cover all of those 4. So as we know, there's a lot of structure within it. Now, the argument today, as I mentioned, is that principles are insufficient. And I sincerely hope that by using these 4 English idioms, although, you know, I can't really claim the crooked timber of humanity to be English, since it was Immanuel Kant who first said it, but, you know, I learned it in English, so it was English. And I want you to just concentrate on them for a moment, because I'm using these idiomatic expressions to highlight certain certain uncoverings, if you will, of places, points of trouble with making principles do work on some of the hard problems. So, and I should mention that, you know, the sheep in wolf in sheep's clothing is sort of covers over everything. Then we have the crooked timber, buck stop, square peg, round hole. So we're starting with sheep's clothing, still a wolf. And basically this idea is that the problems that we're confronting with AI, or the ethical issues that we're drawn to in relation to AI, are very similar in a certain way. We're discovering similar issues in relation to AI that we've experienced in the past. And in fact, you could even go way further back in relation to, I'm just waking up. Okay, now things are going to get going. In relation to technology, even the steam engine, because one of the great anxieties of AI and a lot of technology and digital technologies in particular before the big data, machine learning, etc., is that we have this automation anxiety. We're concerned about what happens when we delegate to a smart machine. So that's the meaning of wolf in sheep's clothing, is to say a lot of these are very similar to issues that we've been dealing with for years, decades, maybe even centuries. And the three dimensions of concern that I want to highlight, one is functional integrity. Is it the same thing when we delegate responsibility? Are online teachers, do they do the same thing as teachers in the flesh? Risks and harms, where clearly there are benefits, but then if we think about the motor car, there are obvious harms that accrue, and this is a concern when you delegate to different actors. And then we have collateral, what I'm calling collateral concerns, which are the values concerns, which are, you may get functional integrity, maybe you've handled some of the risks and harms, but then it comes at certain values costs. So in the case of then, what have been some of the concerns? I mean, you may remember when we moved from analog record players to digital CDs, there were people who was like, it's just not the same, you know. I listened to the CD, it doesn't have the same quality. So this is what we mean by functional integrity, and here are some of the cases. We have the Therac 25 was infamously a software-controlled radiation machine, which was implemented in many hospitals throughout the US. I'm not sure if it was here too, but it was found eventually to have a software bug, and that had actually caused some deaths and also severe irreparable damage to some of the patients. And then we have some of the discussion of ethical values that come as a result of delegation of function to machine, to automation. And what we're confronting today are decisions, the delegation of decision-making to artificial intelligence, to machines. And also there's some attention to cyber-physical systems, self-driving cars. I'm working on a project with handoff of human control to there isn't a good word, because the cars don't drive themselves, trust me. The cars are managed by software, and this is managed by many different parties. But anyway, I'm just going to use that particular expression. We have drones and militarized drones and weaponized drones, and lots of concerns that come out of that. And you can see what they are. We're still experiencing this concept of technology out of control. And sometimes they're kind of cutely troubling. And this was from a New York Times Sunday magazine a couple of weeks ago. But some people have been following this area. Hi, I'm a Wobot, and it uses cognitive behavioral therapy to help people overcome things like obsessive compulsive disorder. And this is supposedly a huge breakthrough because you don't have to go and get a human therapist. You can just use your app, and then it's going to make you feel better, and you don't have to rely on humans anymore, which is really terrible. And I laughed because it really made me think about where Joseph Weizenbaum's Eliza, and it's like, wow, been there, done that, and where did we settle with this? But again, I'm not resolving these, I'm just showing how these issues of delegation raise a bunch of problems. So now you may think, oh, you're such a curmudgeon, you're annoyed that these issues are coming up again. And I want to say right up front, I'm thrilled, because we have now another opportunity in another generation who are going to help us. There were issues we really got stuck on, and they're the same issues that are causing us problems now. So all of you people who are really young and you're sitting and you're excited and you're optimistic, that is great, because you're going to help us with these problems. But not to forget about the past successes, and not to make the same mistakes as previous discussions made, getting stuck at the same points. So let's see how well I can do. Let's go back now to the principles. And what I've done is I've gathered, I looked through all the principles, and I tried to gather them in some categories and see whether we can get some insight into them. And here is the first lump. These, I think, are the least problematic, although they're important. So they're people who are saying, AI for human flourishing. We must make sure that we create it to benefit humanity. We must make sure that the benefits are widely spread, and we must take care of these unintended, you can't take care of unanticipated consequences because they're unanticipated, I guess, but unintended side effects. And, it's helpful to think about some of the test cases like self-driving vehicles where there's a lot of discussion about whether these self-driving vehicles are better in the sense of, maybe more fuel efficient, maybe there are many who claim that they're safer drivers. There are just a few problems we have to take care of, and some already, fatal crashes that make us wonder whether we're ready for it. But the reason I think these are, I don't want to say easy, but I want to say they're less troubling because, say, in the self-driving vehicles or in medicine, the use of AI in medicine and even population health is that we kind of have common values. And so when we try and push to do the right thing, we have a common sense of what the right thing is. I mean, this could be controversial, but I'm just going to say these, I think, are the easy cases from an ethical point of view. They may not be easy from a practical point of view. But now we get into really troubling space, and the panels this morning could not have been better. They were fantastic panels and really helpful for me being able to be a little bit more efficient in what I have to say. I think this is one of the troubling cases. And now I want to get to the second, which is crooked timber of humanity, which is, as you know, a saying of Immanuel Kant, out of the crooked timber of humanity, no straight thing was ever made. And the idea is, you know, humans are not saints and they will do bad things. So the then part of it, I go back to an articles with, and thank you for mentioning the search engine paper with Lucas Introna and also some work with Batya Friedman, where we were a few decades ago again thinking about bias in computer systems. We didn't call them algorithmic systems, but many of those that we discussed were algorithmic, but not algorithmic in the machine learning sense. They were more rule-based algorithms, and so there in blue are some of the issues we looked at, and now you're looking at some of the standard cases that people have been looking at, and of course we heard some terrific examples this morning. And here are some of the cases where bias and discrimination has been discussed, some of the high-profile cases. But I want to dwell on this, because this is a troubling case that, again, I'm sure many of you in this room know about the work by LaTanya Sweeney. So what LaTanya Sweeney and her group showed, they demonstrated, is that, and to hear LaTanya talk about it, she'll say, oh, when I would type my name into a search engine, up would pop these little text ads saying, you know, come to instantcheckmate.com to see if LaTanya Sweeney has a criminal record. Or, you know, and the same for publicrecords.com, a similar kind of service. And so she ran an experiment with names like Kristen and Brad, and also names like Letitia and Hakeem, which are typical black sounding names, and the first are, you know, waspy, whatever sounding names. And she found, lo and behold, that with the black sounding names, there was a much higher probability that you were going to get the text ads on the side offering you the opportunity to see if these people, Hakeem or Letitia, had criminal records. And, you know, and there have been other demonstrations. Anupam Datta and his group have shown that with women, women are shown less lucrative job opportunities than men, and so on. But let's focus on this one for the moment. So, of course, this grabbed a lot of attention. And people said, oh, this is terrible. We have to do something about it. We shouldn't allow for Google's ad system to do this. But when you think about this, and again, thank you for the speaker this morning for describing the behavioral advertising system. What would it take in order for the Google ad system to do something about this problem? You know, it's a very complex, the online ad system is very complex, the targeted ad system. And so the reason, and what Google wants to promise the advertisers is that we're going to place your ads in an optimal place for return on investment. But for Google, it's also very important that they place the ads where the ads are going to gain the most clicks, because that's how Google makes money. Now, if it turns out, and this is where the machine learning model comes into play, that as a matter of fact, historically speaking, people are more likely to be interested in criminal records for people whose names are African American sounding names, then it's logical, it's rational that this algorithm is going to do exactly what it does. And the only way you're going to stop the algorithm from doing this is by making Google's advertising system less good. So the discrimination isn't something added on top of the system. It's fundamentally part of what the system of behavioral advertising is claiming to do. And I don't know that Google can promise anybody anything different, because then Google customers are going to say, why should I advertise with you? Because you're going to put my ads in a suboptimal placement. There's only one thing to do, in my opinion, and that is get rid of targeted advertising altogether. Okay, that's another conversation. But that's just to say how, like, inbred the ethical system, the ethical issues are to the very system itself. All right, moving beyond that, let's look at bundle together accountability. Now, first of all, when people use accountability, they could be meaning two things. One is to say, I'm giving you an explanation for something, and the other one is to say, I am taking responsibility for a particular harm. They're used in both of these ways, and both of them have been very relevant in the space of AI, responsibility and so on. And privacy, because it's the area of great interest to me, is where I'm often paying attention. Now, this is Truman, and supposedly, and I guess according to this picture, he had a sign, the buck stops here. And the problem we've been confronting with technology is that the buck stops nowhere, and once again, this is somehow inherent in these techno-social systems. Lots of information is gathered. We have repeated stories of breaches, and lucky for, I guess, the data breach notification laws. The point is that, and this I keep asking my legal colleagues, they really, and Yafit can vouch for this, I said, like, is there no law that punishes Yahoo? And the answer is no. So we had that. That's a lot. That's a lot of accounts that were breached. And no responsibility. Another case of this is what I'm calling seamless mashup, because that's what this technology is good at. And again, we heard about this in the behavioral advertising talk this morning. We now, this was kind of an evolving thing, and we are where we are, where any single web page is actually a mashup of lots of different, you could think about it, embedded web pages or links to lots of different parties. Now, this is a problem that we can call the problem of many hands, because who takes responsibility for making sure that privacy is protected? I use the New York Times as an example because I consider the New York Times to be an organization with great integrity in general. But once again, I had seen the website, the privacy policy, and I visited once again just to make sure it still is what it is. And they talk about third-party advertising, by the way, which they, having spoken to the General Counsel's office, they were kind of reluctantly forced into doing. But what they say here is that, we use these ad networks and so forth, but we do not have access to nor control over these third parties' use of cookies or other tracking technologies, or how they may be used. In other words, here's the New York Times. We're actually a mashup of all these different parties. You've come to us because you want to come to the New York Times, but sorry, actually, we don't know what these third parties are doing. And I guess that's okay, because it's become the standard, but we're good people, and so here's a link. Check out what their privacy policies are, and you kind of know where that takes you. And very recently, in this effort of, Toronto having engaged with Alphabet, which is, as you see, a sister company to Google, have come into a big experiment in Toronto to create a smart part of the city, and they've employed Sidework Labs, and recently you had Anne Kavukian, who is famous for having coined the term, or I don't know if she actually coined it, but anyway, takes credit for having coined the term. I see Courtney's laughing. Privacy by design. And then she resigned. I imagined us creating a smart city of privacy as opposed to a smart city of surveillance, she said. Now, the point I want to get to is this, which is that even Google, and I'm saying Google, but it's really Sidewalk Labs, says first they were going to, contrary to their initial agreement, or I don't know, verbal agreement, they were going to need to share identified data to third parties. And second, although we have committed to following the principles of privacy by design, the question of whether other companies involved in the project, to whom we are handing over this information, would be required to do so, is unlikely to be worked out soon and may be out of our control. So this is again this idea of the mashup, and buck doesn't stop here. And we've seen that, Mark Zuckerberg, when trying to talk about the debacle that was Cambridge Analytica, again said the only thing he felt responsible for was the fact that these other bad people had done these things using Facebook. And again, with the whole online advertising system, in fact, enabling the fake news providers actually to make quite a lot of money. So there's a problem with responsibility in both senses, and I think that when it comes to privacy, and once more, the lack of explanation or the lack of understanding or the lack of clarity has been discussed by many, and here again is Google saying, we change the privacy policy from time to time and make sure you check frequently, like not wanting, we don't do it until we do, is basically the principle of operation. And my eye caught this particular case where, I don't know, it made my blood run cold, where Google and MasterCard are now cooperating, colluding, if you will, to try and link the purchases that you make online, the purchases that you make using MasterCard with information that Google has about you, which is very vague. Both MasterCard and Google excused this behavior. Let me see. Saying, don't worry, using this trick of, don't worry, we don't use personally identifiable information, which is really very tricky, because there is some way they have of matching purchases. I mean, the whole point of this exercise, I don't really know what it is. I didn't speak to any Google executives, but what I'm inferring from this is for Google to be able to say, we're charging you not only because your ads are clicked, but look, we have now some hard data on conversion rates. And, but they want to say, don't worry, we're not actually looking at Fitlev Aritz's surfing habits and click habits and purchases. We have some scheme of matching the two together and so on. But this is, it doesn't necessarily matter. It's the fact that people didn't know about it. Then Google came back and said, well, you can actually opt out, but then there was a whole discussion on bulletin boards about the fact that nobody could actually find where to opt out and so on. So I think the inscrutability, there just isn't there isn't an ability, even for those of us who are quite determined, to understand, to grasp what's happening. So the accountability as explanation principle simply just has no traction. And this is the last thing I think I'm going to say about privacy, and I will discuss this tomorrow if anybody is interested, but I think that the current regulatory schemes for privacy are utterly, utterly ineffectual, and they're corrupted, thoroughly corrupted. We will never get anywhere with privacy, even if I think, I'm not optimistic about GDPR, I'm not optimistic about the California approach, because there are loopholes in these that will make the status quo simply continue. So finally, I want to come to the humanization or humans, the humanity part of this presentation, and it's the machine-readable human, square peg, round hole. And what I wanted to mention here is that many of us have this experience. You call up your bank, you call up the airline, and you get the voicemail. You get the phone tree, punch one, is this for a flight in the US or abroad? To, what's your social security number, etc. And you're going down this phone tree, and you're just like tearing your hair out, and you're saying, I just want to speak to a human being, please. How do I get to a human being? But the point is, that's not good for the company. What they've done is they've fired a whole lot of operators, and they want you to fit into the scheme. So if you want someone at the end, you might, but first they're trying to squeeze you into these categories of machine-readable humans. And I just want to say, I adore Wikipedia, and I give lots of money to Wikipedia. But this kind of stuff really bothers me. I don't like getting email that's like, Helen, blah, 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 and a picture of Jimmy Wales. And I'm supposed to believe that Jimmy Wales actually cares about Helen. Who are you? So once again, we're using the machine. For some reason, they've identified me. Well, it's not too bad. With Wikipedia, a lot of this comes from the kind of total surveillance that we have. We're becoming machine readable, and we have to make ourselves readable to the machine when it's not super convenient. And that's often for efficiency's sake. We want to produce an outcome at lowest cost. And Martin Heidegger in 1954 had something to say about this in relation to technology in general, saying technology drives on to the maximum yield at the minimum expense, where everything in the world, including humans, are ordered to stand by, to become a standing reserve for whatever the parties wielding the technology need. And so, again, we could think about the advertising, and I use it a lot because it's familiar, and there are ways in which we can test advertising that we can't test many other systems which are much more hidden from view. What they're trying to achieve is efficiency. They want to get to know, they want us to be machine readable so that they know what advertising. Yeah, I'm very close to the end, thanks though. And so I'm highlighting these terms: efficiency to produce a desirable outcome with least waste, expense, effort, or expenditure of resources. This is some definition of efficiency. I might have found it in the Oxford Dictionary. But this is where, in collaborating with computer scientists who believe that efficiency is a kind of objective characteristic that a system is efficient or not, and I say we have to specify desirable for whom, whose waste, expense, effort. So that phone call that you make where you're punching this number and that number because you're desperate to get to the answer you need, really you're wasting a lot of your time and effort, but the company presumably is saving their resources. And what we're doing with embedding artificial intelligence in systems is for these systems to just become a lot better. And Neva, thank you for mentioning Keynote. We have Ad Nauseam, which is a second of our obfuscation projects. And what Ad Nauseam does is it clicks on every single ad on a page. And just to let you know that the system that wants to make you machine readable doesn't like that at all. And so as of today, we're still banned from the Chrome store. So just to a few concluding observations. I'm going to read this to you. You can read it. Relentless data gathering fuels machine learning to provide efficiency gain for a few controllers. Now, that's not necessarily a bad thing, because efficiency gains by controllers can spread and become, maybe in healthcare, the efficiency gains that we get in these ways are not necessarily a bad thing, except, and this has become something I'm tremendously interested in, when the data is monopolized and hoarded, which many of us are now seeing and concerned about, and the efficiency gains concentrated, humans must become machine readable so that they can become machine sortable, manipulable, and unknowingly they can become casualties of probabilistic error, because these systems most of them are not causal in their inferences about us. They're probabilistic, and they're never 100%. And well, sorry for you, but you're in that little, error. And of course, it's worse if you're part of a gender or a race that is more heavily in that error zone, but it affects all of us. So the conclusion of this talk is to say we have these stark areas of contestation. The principles are very good, and I'm not decrying them, but they're not going to offer us cover precisely for those stark areas of contestation. And what we have perhaps at the moment is too weak oversight, maybe a lack of insight into what's going on. And it leaves clashes open to dubious resolution. And I think Neva's comment about power and regulation are really to the heart of things. And humans as a standing reserve to those who bend technology to their interest. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Very inspiring and stimulating. Just to link it to our, to the morning session, I think what comes out from this presentation is that once we look at the values that are embedded in this design, parties that are designing these systems are optimizing their own value, and that's legitimate. But since we assign decision-making power to these machines now in things that are critical to us, we want our social contract to govern and not just the interests of these players. And so that creates a tension between how we perceive our governing values and what these players are doing, which is legitimate in one realm but not legitimate as our social contract, I guess. Let me just open this for discussion, and we can take questions. Can I start with one question as people are thinking their way through? This is a little bit green. This is sort of when we think about the future, and you started with an optimistic look at things from the perspective of how we treated other technologies and how we survived them. And the question is, what should we do now at this particular point of time as we are addressing all these new technological challenges? Just brainstorm with us.
You know, should I just talk in this mic?
Sure. It's not working?
On the mic.
Oh, okay. Oh, see, it's very complicated technology. So I think I see the okay. All right. This is where the sheep, the wolf in sheep's clothing is relevant because cost-benefit analysis can be done badly, and when it's done badly, what happens is that we kind of look globally at the costs and the benefits, and we don't see that there's certain parties who are far enjoying the benefits and others who aren't. Now, within the system, the bias issue is drawing attention to that particular problem, but when we look at policy writ large, the tech industry has managed to persuade regulators, at least in the US where I'm more familiar, that leave us alone because although we will make mistakes and we might do a few bad things here and there, we overall, the rising tide lifts all ships and the trickle down and watch out because if the US doesn't lead, then China's going to take over AI. And so they've gotten by with a lot of this kind of rhetoric. And I don't see that, besides educating people to see that that actually is kind of a zero-sum game, and then looking at the broad societal values, that there's much else to do. And in the case of privacy, where I know which I know best, the self-regulatory framework, I don't know, at some point, it's like the emperor's new clothing. I'm waiting for that moment where people who are the regulators will just stare at fair information practice principles and say, this is taking us to the wrong place and it is not working and we have to do something else. But yeah, so that's where I would start.
Michal.
It's actually a follow-up on what Nipa said. I'm just wondering, going back to your first point, the sheep clothing or nothing new under the sun.
Yeah.
And I'm wondering whether indeed there's nothing new under the sun. Because it's true that many of these issues were there before. But I'm asking myself whether this is not an issue of degree. Whether because when we are talking about data, big data, enormous data, and because data has a lot of network effects and economies of scale effects, maybe, and it is foundational for many technologies that underlies so many of our markets. Maybe we are dealing with another animal. It maybe only looks the same in some issues, but it's really different. It's more scary.
Yeah, so first of all, I definitely, if I gave that impression, thank you for giving me the opportunity for saying that is not at all the impression I wanted to give. Because although we could say the issues of bias, bias is an issue that's been with us, the kind of problems that we're confronting at the moment, and I tried to use the Tanya Sweeney case as an example. The ways to resolve that are fundamentally different because of the type of, I'm going to call it socio-technical systems, that this particular technology of machine learning across historical data raises. So yes, we're not going to be able to use the ways that we've solved, let's say, bias in maybe rule-based systems for this case. Bias is important, but you have to look recognize the differences, and make some hard choices. So yes, yes, yes. And yes, degree can become a different kind, but in this case I would even say that starting out it's not even one of degree, it's different in kind. And just because I don't think I left on even an answer to your question on an optimistic note, it is becoming evident. First of all, this conversation makes me optimistic. The issues of data concentration and so on that really hadn't been observed. The big five were great. Now they're like, maybe not. Maybe they're just like they're not bad. They're just like any other company. And then we're starting to see, even in the news media, politicians and so on are starting to realize. And I think that's the optimistic point. The point is people are starting to see that.
So I need to push on that unless there are other questions, but just to say that all the focus, especially in Europe, is on the big five. The big fives are Google, Facebook, Amazon, Apple, and Microsoft. And that is an anti-American sentiment, and there is a lot of push in the United States on the big five as part of the American politics. But my question is, if this is something that has to do with the technology, this is happening in China too. In China, everything that we discuss is a joke, right? When we think about the social scoring system, that is actually the governing system. So maybe if we're focusing on what is happening in liberal democracies and we are going to push against the big five, we will end up with Chinese technology that would be even worse. But I would leave, let's collect more questions. So Tal, please. Yeah, Tal.
So Helen, I want to tell you what I'm concerned with in academic discussion, and I saw some of it in your presentation in both directions. My sense in these fields, and I see it also in this conference, that academics, especially those that are more indoctrinated, even though they have a new issue like AI, they keep on going to their comfort zones. And they keep on taking the new issue and putting it in the old paradigms. And
sorry.
Oh, everything. They take it to privacy, they take it to antitrust, take it to consumer protection, take it to constitutional law. But my sense is that AI, there's a real evolution, there's a paradigm shift. And I want to ask you, maybe the idea of these new 5 principles is a good idea because it pushes the academics and says, you got to get out of your comfort zone. You have to stop writing the article you wrote last year, scrapping out big data and writing AI in it. And that's why maybe all of us need to be pushed much harder.
Do you want to take a few?
Yeah, we'll take a few.
Maybe I can follow up on Tal's point. You opened with the importance of rhetoric, the importance of terms and choice of terms. And I feel that in this context, and generally in the context of big data, artificial intelligence, so many of the concerns that you discussed are grouped under privacy. And that's a problem. That's a real problem because at the end of the day, with privacy today and with privacy law, we deal in one way, even under the GDPR. Notice consent, individual control. And what we're doing is pushing all those other concerns, some of which have other legal fields that can address them and some of which do not have. And we push them all under privacy. And at the end of the day, we're left with this notice and consent regime, which is private ordering, which is the same problem that you bring up here of principles that are not working.
Yeah.
Yes, please.
And maybe even a further follow-up on that, how do we make privacy risks more concrete? How do we quantify it for the general public to mobilize and, like you said, stop targeted advertising? Maybe a radical idea discussed in the break is maybe one of the roles of the government is to demonstrate what can happen if we push this accumulation of personal information even further, to mobilize people to really act in order to fix what's happening.
Okay.
Yeah, no, fantastically, those are great. Can I just be a little bit like a politician and
Sure.
say
Absolutely.
not answer any of the questions I was asked? Because I wanted to just, I was dying to say something about your
When in
work
Rome.
with Michal. What?
When in Rome, it is.
Yeah. Which is this idea of algorithmic, I don't know, weapons race, arms race, which I think is great, but one of the reasons I even quickly snuck in that ad nauseum slide was to say, yes, do it and see how far you get, because if you're trying to outdo the big machine learning algorithm, maybe you'll get banned from the Chrome store too. Meaning that pushback is costly and maybe it isn't going to be accepted. Well, anyway, that's another conversation. So tolls, yeah, it's hard work that, which is to say, let's see if we can pull out those specific characteristics. I mean, the point, my snarky comment to you was, yeah, we have these go-to categories, but maybe that's just ethics. That is the measure. But you're right in that we've become too slapdash with our use of the term AI. And there is a lot of work that should be done, and I haven't done it, to say, hang on, this belonged there, this belonged there, this belonged there, and now let's focus on some of these hardcore, and they're different, and it's going to require new kinds of thinking. I mean, someone should do the work, because you're right. Right now, we're just on this path where autonomous vehicles, all the issues that are coming up, just look so similar to so many of the other automation challenges that we were confronted. So yes, and both of the comments about privacy, I agree, yeah, fit, and that's why. If privacy means control and means notice and consent, then we have to turf it out and not even, because it's taking us to the wrong place, it's taking us exactly where we are today. And the risks, and the person at the back, you see, what I've tried to do with contextual integrity is say that the risks are not necessarily accrued to the individual. The risks are accrued to society. And when I use Cambridge Analytica as an example for this, I say to people, everyone focuses on, oh my God, Facebook didn't get the consent. No. This nearly undermined democracy as we know it. And that's why you need privacy. It's, or whatever it is you want to call it. I'm not actually devoted to that word, privacy. So maybe if we could get onto that, we would do a better job with appropriate flow of information. Yeah.
That's an optimistic note to finish with. Thank you very much.